Power is not loud. It is not impatient. And it does not need to dominate to exist. What truly terrifies the unformed self is not weakness, but restraint. For only a self that governs itself can ever be trusted with power. In this episode, Iqbal's idea of power is stripped of domination and aggression. True power is revealed as mastery of impulse, emotion, and reaction. A self that cannot govern itself will always misuse authority. A self that controls itself becomes unshakable, calm, disciplined, and enduring. This is power that compounds quietly and reshapes reality without force. This is episode 35 from Allama Khudi, where Iqbal defines power not as control over others, but as sovereignty over the self, where restraint becomes strength, silence becomes authority, and mastery replaces domination. This episode explores why power without self-control corrupts, and why disciplined power outlasts time itself. Power is often mistaken for domination. Iqbal understood power as control of the self before control of circumstance. The self that seeks power outwardly without mastering inwardly creates danger. Uncontrolled power fractures character. Controlled power stabilizes destiny. The self learns that power begins with restraint. Restraint prevents impulse from ruling action. Action governed by impulse leaks strength. True power does not erupt. It accumulates. Accumulation requires discipline. Discipline resists immediacy. The self that cannot delay gratification cannot be trusted with authority. Authority magnifies flaw. Flaw exposed corrupts outcome. The self discovers that power is conserved energy. Energy wasted on reaction is unavailable for creation. Creation defines sovereignty. The self that reacts surrenders command. Command requires pause. Pause restores judgment. Power exercised compulsively reveals insecurity. Security expressed quietly radiates confidence. The self learns that control over speech is early evidence of power. Words spoken without measure dissipate authority. Measured speech concentrates force. The self that dominates others often avoids governing itself. Self-governance is harder. Harder tasks build substance. Power without self-control destroys trust. Trust broken undermines influence. Influence regained demands restraint. The self understands that power must be educated. Raw power intimidates. Educated power guides. Guidance earns consent. The self begins to respect the slowness of real strength. Real strength does not rush. Rushing signals instability. The self learns that self-control is invisible strength. Invisibility protects durability. Durable power endures scrutiny. The self recognizes that power must submit to values. Power above values corrupts. Values above power stabilize civilization. The self that governs desire governs direction. Desire unruled hijacks aim. Aim hijacked wastes potential. The self sees that self-control converts impulse into choice. Choice restores authorship. Authorship defines dignity. The self understands that power requires accountability. Unchecked power isolates. Accountable power integrates. Integration sustains legacy. The self becomes cautious. With emotional force. Emotion manipulated weakens judgment. Judgment disciplined secures influence. The self accepts that power grows through endurance. Endurance trained in silence. Silence teaches command over urge. The self notices that power matures when ego subsides. Ego seeks victory. Power seeks stability. Stability outlasts triumph. The self learns that the strongest force is refusal to act destructively. Destruction demands less skill, construction demands mastery. The self understands that domination collapses quickly. Self-command compounds slowly. Slow compounding wins time. The self becomes aware that power devoid of mercy hardens. Mercy without strength dissolves. Their union preserves order. The self recognizes that power is proven by what the self chooses not to do. Unchosen actions reveal maturity. Maturity builds credibility. The self learns that restraint enhances clarity. Clarity guides effective response. Response calibrated preserves authority. The self realizes that real power is calm. Calm absorbs disturbance. Disturbance cannot destabilize mastery. The self senses that self-control liberates energy. Energy liberated funds creation. Creation confirms potency. The self understands that power grows internally before appearing externally. Appearing too soon exposes weakness. The self comprehends that strength judged by resistance rather than aggression endures indefinitely. The self stands firmer by mastering itself than by dominating the world. The self gradually learns that self-control is not suppression. It is alignment. Aligned energy flows cleanly. Suppressed energy erupts destructively. The self understands that power disciplined internally prevents external conflict. Conflict consumes energy. Energy conserved builds capacity. The self recognizes that self-control sharpens perception. Under control, emotion informs but does not command. Command reserved for judgment protects direction. The self learns. That power must tolerate discomfort. Discomfort avoided weakens resolve. Resolve trained under strain stabilizes influence. The self realizes that impulsive strength fades quickly. Steady strength compounds. Compound strength shapes environment subtly. The self understands that self-control extends beyond emotion. It governs attention. Attention misdirected leaks power. Attention disciplined directs force effectively. The self notices that power seeks coherence. Coherence emerges from consistent restraint. Inconsistency fractures authority. Authority fractured loses legitimacy. The self learns that power improves with humility. Humility invites correction. Correction strengthens judgment. The self recognizes that self-control allows flexibility. Rigid reaction limits options. Controlled response expands choice. Expanded choice empowers strategy. The self understands that endurance attracts trust. Trust multiplies reach. Reach invites responsibility. Responsibility tests self-control again. The self learns that power measured by destruction exhausts itself. Power measured by preservation accumulates quietly. The self senses that restraint refines courage. Courage guided by restraint protects others. Unguarded courage harms unintentionally. The self realizes that control increases capacity for love. Love without control becomes dependency. Control without love becomes tyranny. Union generates authority with compassion. The self understands that power matures through patience. Patience waits for right moment. Right moment amplifies effect. The self accepts that power must resist temptation to prove itself. Proving wastes energy. Energy reserved for alignment magnifies impact later. The self learns that self-control regulates ambition. Unregulated ambition burns resources. Regulated ambition builds legacy. The self notices that power stabilizes behavior under praise. Praise tempts arrogance. Arrogance destabilizes judgment. Self-control anchors humility. The self understands that self-control shields against resentment. Resentment consumes attention. Attention distracted weakens authority. The self learns that power strengthened inwardly creates resilience against provocation. Provocation loses leverage. The self recognizes that control over reaction creates emotional literacy. Literacy informs response without surrender. The self understands that power grows through repetition of restraint. Repetition ingrains mastery. Mastery expresses authority quietly. The self notices that strength in silence outweighs strength in display. Display attracts resistance. Silence advances purpose unnoticed. Time misused drains influence. Time preserved builds capability. The self accepts that power must operate within limits. Limits preserve structure. Structure prevents collapse. The self recognizes that unconditioned power becomes unpredictable. Predictability under discipline creates security. Security allows trust. The self understands that self-control elevates decision-making. Elevated decisions avoid unnecessary conflict. Conflict avoided preserves vitality. The self learns that power exercised ethically does not require enforcement. Ethical consistency compels alignment naturally. The self begins to experience effortless authority. Effortless authority arises when restraint aligns perfectly with purpose. There comes a moment when the self understands that power mastered inwardly no longer seeks recognition outwardly. Recognition seeks coherence. Coherence radiates authority naturally. The self realizes that self-control frees power from fear. Fear demands reaction. Control permits response. Response protects direction. The self understands that true strength never rushes conflict. Conflict reacts. Strength positions. Positioning decides outcome. Before confrontation begins, the self learns that disciplined power creates safety. Safety allows growth. Growth sustained nurtures civilization. The self recognizes that self-control protects power from misuse. Misuse erodes legitimacy. Legitimacy lost brings collapse. The self sees that power tempered by restraint becomes dependable. Dependability attracts responsibility. Responsibility expands influence. The self understands that mastery over self eliminates need for domination. Domination reveals weakness. Self-command confirms strength. The self learns that power guided by conscience outlasts power fueled by appetite. Appetite burns briefly. Conscience endures pressure. The self recognizes that restraint transforms aggression into protection. Protection stabilizes order. Order sustains freedom. The self senses that self-control enlarges emotional intelligence. Emotions understood lose power to deceive. Deception prevented safeguards judgment. The self understands that the most powerful act is refusal to abandon principle. Principle upheld under pressure becomes character. Character withstands time. The self notices that disciplined power influences without coercion. Coercion invites resistance. Influence invites cooperation. Cooperation multiplies reach. The self learns that self-control preserves clarity under stress. Stress reveals maturity. Maturity governs outcome. The self recognizes that the self which restrains itself cannot be controlled easily. External control targets impulse. Impulse neutralized resists manipulation. The self understands that power comes full circle. From discipline to calm. From calm to authority. From authority to service. Service completes power ethically. The self accepts that self-control is the crown of strength. Strength without crown fractures. Crowned strength governs responsibly. The self realizes that restraint stabilizes identity. Identity stabilized resists erosion. Erosion avoided preserves legacy. The self sees that power guided inwardly aligns outward reality. Aligned reality responds constructively. The self understands that self-control anchors greatness. Greatness unanchored destroys. Anchored greatness uplifts. The self experiences that mastery of self is the final victory. Everything else flows from it. The self now knows power that governs itself never needs to announce itself. And in that silence, true strength stands complete.